So this is Thursday night, spooky glow, Hatha flow, whatever it is that I want to do, kind of practice. So normally the way I practice is I don't really make a plan. In my house I would put on, normally, like if I'm here but not with you guys, I would put on some music, climb on the mat, lay down, or sit down, or whatever, and see what happened. So I usually lay down. So, and then just kind of like follow my inclination as to where I want to go. It's a great way, if you are inclined to practice at your house without any sort of supervision or guidance. It's a great way to sort of hone your sort of intuitive practice. And so I highly recommend it. But since you're here with me, and you're gonna just basically take this ride with me, I'll just talk you through whatever it is I decide to do in the moment. So for now, I'm gonna start lying down. I am gonna build like a little bit of a couch. So I've got a pillow here that's kind of long. I'm gonna put a yoga block underneath the top of it so that it sort of tilts a little bit. It's a little squishy. So like if you have, I might put a blanket under there. If you have some pillows or blankets, you can kind of build up a little bit of a support structure for yourself. Or you can just lie down on the floor and not worry about all this stuff. But this is a nice little way to sort of get started. And then, I'm gonna, once I get my back adjusted, now for me, depending on what I've got going on, so let's pretend I only have yoga blocks. I can put a yoga block underneath my shoulder blades and a yoga block underneath my head. Because this pillow is a little softer, I can let that come all the way down to the bottom of my rib cage without causing any trouble. If you had a blanket and that's all you had, you could roll the blanket up or kind of fold it up and put it down the length of your spine so that you just have a little bit of an opening. Now this position with the feet is called constructive rest, and generally speaking, we want the feet positioned so it feels like the femur bone, the big thigh bone, drops into the hip socket and lets your low back let go. So it releases any tension or pressure on the hip flexors. So that's option number one. Option number two is to extend the legs all the way out. And if you have a little bit of tension in your hip flexors, you'll feel a little bit of a lifting, potentially, from the back of your rib cage, where the hip flexors attach up here at the back of your ribs, not the front, but the back. And so that, for me, kind of gives me a slightly deeper back bend sensation, almost like a fish pose, except that my head is up instead of down. And I like this sometimes, and sometimes I want the more relaxed position. And then the third option would be to put the feet together so you have little butterfly wings. You can have the feet closer or farther away. You can have support under your legs or not. So you're just going to pick one of those three options for yourself. Like this one is the one that kind of is feeling good to me. And this is how I practice. So I get on the mat, I try different things. Jiggle around a little bit. Try something else. I've definitely got a little history, right, of practice and poses that I know I like, props that I know I like. But sometimes I'll just try something a little different, experiment, get a little fun and creative. And so we're easing. This is kind of an interesting time of year for me because I'm feeling this kind of pull of the kind of slowing down. Late summer in Virginia gets really hot and sticky, and so I feel myself kind of already starting to kind of want to slow down a little bit, and then as we ease into fall and winter, there's this kind of inclination to me to sort of go a little deeper, spend a little more time with poses, do some breath work, do more meditative stuff. In the spring and early parts of the summer, I like movement and kind of frivolity. So you just notice your own inclinations as you practice. Do you always like the same thing? Does it change with the season? So I'm going to use this opportunity because I'm in this little bit of a back bend, and there's kind of, every time I take a deep breath, my bottom of my rib cage flares. And so I'm going to take advantage of that and exaggerate it a little bit for about 5 more breaths. going to change this a little bit. And by that I mean I'm going to take the stuff out from under my back. And then I'll come back to the position laying down with my legs stretched out. Okay. So I still have a blanket here. I think I'm going to use that to my advantage and just have like a little bit of a head support. Oh. Okay, so coming back to the legs stretched out, I just want to feel, is there a difference in the way my back feels, or my shoulders, or the chest? So again, like one of the reasons that we practice the yoga poses is so that we can deepen our sensitivity, right? So we can get more and more and more sensitive to sensation, sensitive to just how things impact us, or how our, you know, just how things go. More sensitive to kind of emotional shifts, more sensitive to when things are, you know, we're starting to react to things, so that we can theoretically become more skilled at navigating the ups and downs of life. I would like to think that that's going to happen. Oh, okay, so I started with some windshield wipers, and now it's feeling kind of good to draw the knees in, so you can kind of play with this notion of some little nice poses to sort of iron out or release tension from your back. And then I'm going to do one of my favorite poses ever, which is a spinal twist. So you can do a spinal twist in a lot of different ways. So the legs can just rest. You can stick a little yoga prop between your knees, or a pillow. A pillow works great. Or you can have a yoga prop underneath. I'm kind of a fan of under the bottom, and then take the top leg and drape it over into the space I just made by putting a prop in there. It blocks a little pokey, but I'm going to work with it. So then I'm rolling, kind of pressing my elbows into the floor and pushing my shoulders around a little, try to get my upper back nice and level on the ground. And then I can kind of play with this. So I want to make room between my hip and my rib, because that feels amazing. And a lot of times I'll develop some tension in my low back. And so I'm just going to play with that by shifting the weight of my leg, by drawing this hip down, by drawing this rib up, and not, you know, causing any trouble for the rest of my body, but finding a way to kind of get just a little bit more space there. Oh, it's really nice when someone else kind of pulls your hip down, but we don't have that going for us right now, y'all. So we'll just work with what we got. Okie dokie, we're going to take a nice big breath, and then I'm going to bring this knee back to the center and come all the way back to the middle. Ugh. Now, there's a little change, so I can already feel that there's a little difference between the left side and the right side. So I'm just going to, again, play with that difference. I'm going to play with the little windshield wipers. You can stretch the legs all the way out. You can do the little back massage. Let's kind of feel out what's different. Release any tension or any stress that developed in your body as a result of doing that yoga pose. And then you can also get a gander on, is the thing I just did feeling good, or did I do a little too much? You know, if it feels a little tender, a little sore, maybe that was a little too much. There might be a situation where you find you could have gone a little farther. I don't know. I never notice that. I always notice too much. Sometimes the sensations are a little more mild, sometimes a little greater. So again, I'm just trying to kind of create a little traction between this part of my rib and my hip without being too much of a bully on any one part of my body here. It's really subtle. A lot of the thing that's really interesting to me right now is like, how little can I move and still feel something? It's kind of the the question that I'm asking of myself right now. What's the tiniest amount of movement I can do and feel it? There's always like a little bit of reserve space. And again, it's this idea of kind of honing the sensitivity to the poses. Take a nice big breath, and then I'm going to bring this top leg on back and then bring the other leg back. So taking a moment again to just sort of feel what happened. I'm kind of working with these shapes that I've been doing so I can feel the difference. And then I'm just going to stretch myself back out and see if there's a difference in general in the way my body feels. I wore the wrong shirt tonight, but we're gonna just go with it. And hopefully I won't flash you guys on the internet. Okay, so right now it feels like my legs feel a little longer. There's kind of a little bit of softness that's developed. You know, when I first stretched my legs out, I felt like my low back was arching off the floor, and that feels a little less so. So there's definitely a change has occurred, and it's a change that I would suggest is relatively pleasant. So I'm going to kind of keep going with this notion, all right? So I'm going to put one leg up on top. So I've got one foot on the floor, in this case my left foot, and then I've put my right ankle up on top. Now, I'm going to leave my foot resting on the floor, but you could also lift that leg up and do the work from here, right? From kind of being a little bit floaty. So I've got my hands behind my head because I have a tendency, if I don't pay attention, to pull with my neck instead of use my abdominals to try to curl myself up. So I'm going to do two movements. I'm going to curl straight up the center, and then I'm going to bring my left elbow towards my right knee by curling on the side, okay? So straight up the center, to the side. Straight up the center, to the side. I'm just going to do them just like that. Try to keep my head stable so I make myself use my abs. It's not easy to talk and do this at the same time. So I'm going to be quiet now. Let's try to do 5 more. And again, it's like, what's the least amount of movement I can do and feel that connection with my abs? So I don't do things that cause injury, but I do things that make my abdominal muscles kind of work. And I like the pleasant warmth that comes from warming up the abdominals. So one of the kind of notions from Ayurveda about late summer, early fall is that we're trying to kind of process the heat from summer. And one way that we can process the heat is by doing things that kind of get a little bit warmer. And for me, core work is that thing. So for you, it might be running or, you know, something else, jumping jacks, whatever you like to do. But for me, this is the deal. So now that I've done that, I'm going to add on to this, okay? Now, I'm going to elevate my hips a little bit. So I'm going to use this pillow. You could also use a yoga block. And then I'm going to do a little stretch for both my hip flexor and for my piriformis here on the right leg. Okay, hang on. Oh, this pillow is the hardest thing. Why I chose this, I don't know. You're going to watch me struggle for a second to get hold of the other end of this. Hold on. There we go. So I can get it all straight. Okay, now, with my hip elevated, I'm going to get a little bit bigger hip flexor stretch. Okay, so you can do this just resting on the floor, especially if your hip flexors are tight. So my left leg, like normally it would be there, right, laying on the floor. So with the bolster, my leg drops a little further over, so I get a longer pull on that hip flexor. And then this leg, which was the one that was up on top, I'm just going to bring in here toward me. So basically what I'm doing is a pigeon upside down. So you can hold onto this leg in a lot of different ways. What is really important for me, because I don't want the lower leg bones to torque in the knee joint, because this might be giving me some resistance, right? So I am externally rotating my thigh as much as I can, but then I'm keeping my knee and my shin and the top of my foot completely aligned. So this whole lower leg bone, and I've got my foot flexed, this whole lower leg situation is totally stable. So that all of the movement has to come from my thigh and not from me torquing my lower leg in relationship to my thigh bone, okay? And then I'm reaching out through this left leg. So there's a seated pose that looks a little bit like this called the archer, where you pull your foot all the way back by your ear. So like you're pulling back a bowstring with your with your peace sign fingers on your big toe. This is feeling like I'm gonna name this something. This is gonna become a Halloween pose. I just have to figure out what the name is gonna be. Because it's on the ground, so that means it's dead. See, dead archer. But that doesn't sound as good. I'm gonna come up with something. Maybe you guys have an idea. You can leave me a comment or something in the chat section. So we're gonna do 2 more big breaths here. I can't get my foot all the way to my ear here, y'all. Not in this position. All right, so now I'm gonna go in for the hamstrings. So I'm gonna use a strap to do that because it's just a little bit easier than my arm. But if you can hold on to your big toe and extend your leg and there's not a problem, then do that. If you need a little bit of extra, then use a strap. Oh, I like a strap. Now I'm up on this bolster, and I'm gonna just stay up here. But it just means I have to kind of regulate a little bit what's going on. If I want to take the hip flexors out of it, I can put my foot on the ground like that. Kind of enjoying having both right now, so I'm going with this. Now there's an interesting experiment that I find really fun to do with the hamstrings, and that is, like, should my leg be straighter and then farther away from me to manage where the hamstring stretch occurs? So if I bring my leg closer to me with the straighter leg, I feel the distribution of that stretch over the whole hamstring. Whereas if I bend my knee and pull my leg in, for me that becomes very, very sharp right at the sit bone. So straighter leg is actually better for me. So notice if that's true for you, because it may not be, right? Is it better to have a straighter leg and just back off a little bit altogether, or is it better to have the bent knee? And you have to just notice, where does the pose hit you? And if it hits you right in one tiny little place at a bone, then that may not be the best answer. So I'm going to take one more breath here, and then I'm going to take this leg out to the side so I can get this inner thigh. Oops, I did not mean to let go of the strap. Hold on. All right. And so again, I'm going to have to exert just a little bit of force to keep myself up here, because I'm leaning over the edge now. So it wants to pull me all the way over onto my right side. So I'm using a little extra energy to keep my left hip stable. Again, it might be better to go a little farther away and have a straighter leg, or maybe the bent knee is better here, because it's a different muscle. It might have different rules. Let's say check again. Okay, I'm going to do about 3 more breaths here. I feel like that might be good. Okay, and then I'm going to come on back to the center, undo this whole thing, and just for fun, I'm going to make this hard on myself. I'm going to slide this guy out of there for a moment. And then stretch out my legs and see if I feel a difference. Right side to left side. And both sides had some things that happened, right? So I did hamstrings, inner thigh, external hip rotators on this side. This side was mostly about my hip flexor, and this side is feeling really, really soft right around this kind of front of my hip. And this side just has very different sensation. Like I feel a lot more kind of energy or like warmth, nice pleasant warmth in the back part of my leg. So, it's fun. Notice what the impacts of the pose are. So once again, we're going to do that whole sequence again on the other side. So I've got this leg crisscrossed. I'm going to do the core work first, the little curls. And of course you can, if you want to, you can hover the legs and do it that way. So if that makes it, so you have to do a little bit more work. I'm working right now in my own practice on isolating and really making my neck not do things it ought not to. So for me, the work continues there. So exhale, curl, and then we're going to do this little right elbow towards the left knee, right? Do 5 more. Or whatever I think 5 is, because I forgot to count. I think I've got 1 more to go. All right. Oh, that feels so good. I like the pleasant, like, delicious warmth that develops from doing that. Okay, let's see if I can do it this time a little bit easier. Yay. All right, now we're gonna do the other side with pinned stretching that leg all the way out. So now my right leg is the hip flexor leg and my left leg is the external hip rotators. So again, I want to keep the shin completely lined up, knee, shin, top of my foot. Make the work happen from the thigh bone, so I can do whatever version works best, and then I'm reaching out through the front of this right hip. Now my right side is a little bit tighter. My heel doesn't even want to touch the ground completely, so I could probably have done this without the pillow, but I'm getting a little bit more length over here, rehabilitating a little injury from long time ago, like 6-8 months ago. And so I'm finally getting some opening and some space and some softness happening here again. So it feels good. Take about 3 more breaths with my, whatever I'm going to call this, dead archer for now, pose. I like to make up Halloween poses. You guys know this. Some Frankenplank, things like that. It's the season for Frankenplank. Take 1 more breath. Oh, and then we're going to let go. And I'm going to slide over to the hamstrings. So once I've got this setup going to my liking, I'm going to reach back out through that right hip. So again, we're just kind of finding the balance between the hamstrings and the hip flexors in an appropriate way for you. Deep breaths. So I have tight calves. My hamstrings are fairly loose, but my calf muscles. So by pulling my toes down and kind of pushing up through the heel, this becomes a story about calf muscles. It feels good. gonna try to do this without setting myself on fire. So I'm gonna take my leg over to the side here, hopefully between the candles. And then I'm anchoring this hip down as I'm holding out. Two more big breaths here. All right, I'm going to try to come all the way back with my exhale. All right. The good news is nothing got set on fire. It's a victory when you don't set yourself on fire. Now, I've been in this inversion for a while, and if you have joined me with putting something under your hips, you have also been inverted for a while. So I'm going to take my hips off this pillow, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of time, like about, I don't know, 5-6 breaths, to jiggle, windshield wiper, back massage, all those good things, and mostly just let the blood flow had to shift in order to not overwhelm my brain. Kind of return to normal, because I didn't have my legs, both legs in the air the whole time, so it won't take too long. But it does help, especially if you're prone to a little bit of lightheadedness or dizzy spells. You might have low blood pressure for a variety of reasons. It helps to just let your body kind of settle. Okay, so we're gonna come up, and I'm trying to think of what I want to do next. I feel like I'm gonna go to all fours and do some cat shapes. So if you want to join me there, I think that would be a nice place to go. Yeah, I'm thinking that's going to be good. So I'm going to turn my hands in different directions. So I'm going to start with them turned out to the side, because it makes my wrists do things a little differently. Oh. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little stretch for my wrist, and I like to do them one at a time because they're pretty intense. So I'm turning my hand all the way around. Now my thumb points to the outside, not the inside, and then kind of leaning back a little bit. Get a little stretch through the back of my, my underarm, under forearm, and the back of my wrist, or bottom of my wrist, as you might, whatever you think about it as. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Kind of flip that around and then lean into it. Some days that's pretty tight and intense. Now, one of the things that's happening for me with a little bit more use of the computer and a little bit less a little bit less time maybe being spent doing other things is I'm noticing like just a little bit of tension developing around my thumb, and there is a forearm muscle up on the top of the forearm that is in part responsible for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch the top of my forearm by kind of holding onto my hand and pressing, and then in a second I'm going to find this muscle with the thumb. So first I'm going to start like that. Then I'm going to open my thumb out really wide and pull it backwards. And as I pull it backwards and forward, just resting my hand here, I'm going to try to feel where the muscle is. And the way it works for me is it goes kind of across from the thumb side over here to the elbow side. And so that muscle path, I'm going to do a little bit of a massage on. So I'm just going to friction massage across the top of my forearm as I lift my thumb and draw it backwards. And this is a way for me to release some of the tension from my thumb being forward, like over the phone, right? Or over the mouse. So if you have similar kinds of issues, you can try that and see if that helps. So I'm going to do similar things. So I'm going to stretch out my front back of my hand and the front. And then drawing the thumb, I'm going to lift and move that thumb back and forth and just try to feel the path of the muscle that does that work. And then lifting my thumb up off the floor. I'm pushing my index finger knuckle down and lifting my thumb back, and then I'm going to massage that muscle that I can feel kind of lifting off my forearm here. And it's worse for me on the left actually than the right, even though I'm right-handed. Okay. So then, just kind of noticing how the wrists have landed and whether that's created any sense of kind of freedom or movement in your thumb. Now, yesterday, my thumb was kind of sore because I was working a little bit more on my tablet. And now, because I've done that a couple days in a row, I'm actually not experiencing any discomfort in that thumb. So you can check it out and see if it works for you as well. All right, now with that, I'm going to take myself to downward dog. I may have to spray my mat down again because I don't know how slippery it's going to be. I sprayed it at the beginning, but sometimes it dries out before I get to here. Oh. And so I love to play with the shoulders once I get into downward dog, because there's this, you can push against the floor, and gravity kind of wants to do certain things to your upper back, and oh, it feels nice. Okay, so when you're done playing with your version, or whether that's shoulders or maybe walking your legs up and down, because that feels really nice too, you can come out of there. Give my mat a little water spritz so that it's sticky again. And then, so I'm going to let you figure yourself out there. But once you're out of downward dog and you're standing back up, you can check in. And then once you've done that, find a mountain pose. So I'm going to find my mountain pose and just pause with it for a second and feel. I don't know what's going to happen next. I've got some ideas though. Okay, so I'm going to take my right foot, bring it back behind my left foot. I'm going to make sure I've got both feet nice and firm on the ground. Bringing my right arm over toward the left. I'm going to give myself a nice big stretch across that whole right side. I might lean back into it a little bit, see how that feels. Try not to pull myself off my own feet. Coming back. Taking a moment. And then the other side. So taking the left leg back, finding a nice solid ground. And then as I'm ready, kind of pulling myself over. And again, I can experiment. I'm running into the plates. Experiment with leaning back into it a little bit. Coming on back. It's good to open your eyes from time to time. It's one of the other things. I started doing this habit a long time ago of doing all of my practices with my eyes closed. And it makes for wobbly times, which isn't that embarrassing when you're by yourself, but kind of embarrassing when you're on the interwebs. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little tree pose with all the weight in my right leg. Give Giving myself a moment. Oh, a little wobbly tonight. Taking a big breath. I'm going to lift this left leg up and step it back. Oh. All right, so I'm kind of in a warrior one kind of mood, so I think we're going to start there. You got a different mood, maybe pick a different pose. I don't care. It's your mat. Do your thing. All right, so with a warrior one, I turn my toes in as far as I can, but still keep my heel on the ground. So it's not a lunge, okay? And then I don't want my feet lined up like I'm on a tightrope. I need a little bit of a base. So the right foot lines up with my right hip. Left foot lines up with the left hip. So about hips distance apart, right? That gives me a nice base. I don't really want to overly turn my hip forward. I want to let the hip follow the knee and the ankle. So I'm letting that kind of happen. But you can turn your ribs forward. Oh, I think I'm going to take my left elbow underneath the right elbow and get a little extra shoulder action here. You can do this or not do this, just depending on how it feels. And take a big breath. I'm going to let go and come into a bowing warrior, humble warrior. Now, I could use my strap to make my shoulders kind of have a little bit more open space. So I'm just going to take one hand and grab the other. If you want to lace your fingers together and bring your arms all the way up, you can. My shoulders are too tight for that. So pressing back into my back foot so I'm nice and rooted. Letting my head kind of dangle here. So there's a nice sense of release as my giant brain pulls on my neck a little bit. All right, maybe it's my skull and not my brain. 2 more breaths. And then letting our arms go. So I'm going to do this kind of little bit of a stretch again for the hamstrings. All right, so a couple things that make it interesting. I like to elevate my hands. So I'm coming up on some blocks, and then I'm kind of at a diagonal. So my torso is pointed the same direction as my back toes. And then I'm straightening out this right leg as much as it feels okay to do. And letting myself have like a little bit of a shoulder opening, and also, the inner hamstring, holy moly, is a nice big stretch there. It's almost like downward dog, but not quite. Alrighty, so I'm going to bring this whole thing back together. I'm going to do standing splits for a few moments. And you can let go of everything and try to hold the balance. It's a lot of poses on this side, so I'm getting a little tired in the hip here. So then, when you're ready, put your foot down. And then we're going to come all the way up. Give it a big stretch. And then find the mountain pose again. Yogis. Alrighty. That feels so good. So I love the way it feels when you've done one side with a bunch of stuff and you haven't done the other side yet. And one side feels almost like it's got fizzy lifting gas. It's very cool. And then the other side's like, hey, what about me, man? So we should do the other side. So starting with the tree pose, with the weight on the left leg. At least that's the way I'm gonna roll. You wanna do a different pose? I'm not gonna stop you, you're at your house. Maybe you're not quite as wobbly as I am today. All right, so I'm going to pick that up and step it back, and then kind of wiggle my way into what feels like a nice warrior one. And then, I think I did the left elbow last time, so we'll do the right elbow on the bottom this time. It's a little more tender grab. more breath. And then I'm gonna do my bowing warrior. So last time I reached back, grabbed my left hand with my right, so now I'm gonna grab my right hand with my left. I'm gonna let myself bow in here. And again, I tend to close my eyes and just let this whole thing get wobbly, but you do you. So again, I'm kind of picking up my shoulders a little bit, spread out my toes, try to find some interesting kind of places to let go. And then I'm going to turn it into this diagonal kind of variation on the pyramid, split leg forward bend shape. Turn that back into kind of coming all the way around my standing splits. Ooh. Aim it right up at the top here and see if I can let go and hold on to the balance. Work. Work. One more breath. And then I'm going to bring it back together. Eventually, you can come to your mountain pose. And again, take a minute, maybe not a whole minute, maybe more than a minute, to just kind of pandiculate a little bit, jiggle. And then pause and feel. And has a change occurred? One more of these little standing balance pose sequences, and I want to do a specific thing with my arms that I can't do all by myself, so I'm going to use a strap to do it. So I'm going to put my left foot in the strap, and I'm going to bring my arms over my head. Now, this is going to get tricky because I'm already wobbly today, so I'm going to try to get myself up. All right. So with my hands back, I'm letting my thigh lift. I'm going to hold this dancer. Good. Gotta let go if it starts to fall apart. Because otherwise, things will go down. All right, so then just kind of bringing myself back to warrior two. Oh, that was fun though. So sometimes you can't like really get a pose all by yourself. You can use prompts to kind of make it happen. All right, with warrior two, the danger is that I'm going to collapse this inner thigh. So I want to just adjust everything so my legs feel nice and steady. Oh, and then my favorite little flow action is to do this kind of reverse warrior into side angle, but I'm going to kind of add on to it today and do a triangle, a warrior two, a reverse, a side angle, a triangle, a warrior two. I'm going to do that one more time. So we're just in motion with these shapes. In motion in ways I hadn't anticipated. Or anticipated maybe, but not intended. So I'm going to bring my toes around so that they both sets of toes point forward. And then I'm going to start to fold forward. Now, if you feel any binding in your hip or in your knee, just spin your toes out a little bit. They don't have to point particularly forward. It can be more of a diagonal. And again, this is where you're going to test out like straighter legs. For me, straighter legs is better. And just don't go in as deep. But for you, again, it might be different. So testing it out on your own. Now I'm going to take this into kind of like a little half squat kind of flow, except I'm not going to go too deep. You might want to go deeper into your groins. Let your hip get way down deep. I'm going to keep my hip mostly at the height of my knee. One more time on each side. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this whole thing back into the warrior two. Go in the other direction. So just adjusting my legs, coming back up. Taking that reverse, side angle, triangle, warrior two. Reverse, side angle, triangle, warrior two. Two more. All right, and so this is where I'm going to try to take myself back to the balancing pose on the other side. So, getting my right foot into position with my arms overhead. Holding the dancer as best you can. And again, if it starts to fall apart, I'm letting go with my hands, like that. Drop the foot, okay? So that we don't cause trouble. And then come back to mountain pose. See where it landed us. Okay, so I'm going to come back to my squat and eventually sit down, and depending on how that works for you, you can, like sitting down is, from a squat is not easy for me, but for some people you can just sit right down when you're ready. So instead, switch one leg in and one leg out. Okay. So just to come to the sort of mountain pose of seated poses, and you can sit yourself up on a blanket. So if you have a blanket, you can sit right on the edge of it, so that your sit bones are a little bit high up on the edge of the blanket. And then it's a little easier for a lot of us to sit up nice and tall at that point. So the toes point up, little bend in the knees. And I don't have long enough arms, so this is the other reason the blanket is helpful, because I can't touch the floor. But I can kind of press down into the blanket. I can use fists or fingertips or palms. The idea is that you're going to press your palms down into the floor. Without pushing the rib cage forward, can we get taller and also create the situation where you feel the shoulder blades come down the back and the toes point straight up. So there's a sense of a mountain pose. This is called staff pose, Dandasana. Just feeling that. And then, we'll take that staff pose forward. Now, if you have a mind to grab your toes, you can wrap a strap around your feet. The reason I like to hold the toes is just so I can kind of push and bend the knee a little bit more and lift the quads which lets my hamstrings have a little more room. I'm also trying to keep my spine nice and long, so not rounding from the back. If I wanted to get my forehead to my shins, I would have to really round my upper back, and I'm not necessarily in the mood for that tonight. There are nights where it might be appropriate. One more big breath here. And I'm gonna let this guy go. I'm gonna come out of this shape for a moment. Give everything a little bit of a shimmy. Now I'm gonna take a really simple cross-legged sitting position, but you could do the half Lord of the Fishes shape instead, where you have one leg over the other. This is a much more, I can focus more on my spine if I'm not mucking about with my hips. So I'm gonna twist to my left first, so turning the right side toward the left. And then there's room, I can hold on to that knee, that's pretty good. Send my sit bones down a little bit. Now, I'm gonna try to isolate this movement in my back. And at the point where my right sit bone wants to come with me, I know I'm done, like my back isn't gonna twist anymore. So I just back off a little bit. If you have sacroiliac joint dysfunction, some really issues, like some people get them when they have kids, and other people for whatever reason. So if you have some issues like that, let your hip come with you a little bit. Like, don't fight it. But you could also just back off. You know, if you're not trying to get your arm over your leg and stuff, but if you are, then let your hip go with you. There's just different ways to practice, and my preference is to be a little bit more intentional with the center of the body and worry less about what the arms are doing. Whereas other people want their arms in a particular place, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just a different focus. So I'm going to do 2 more breaths here. Alright, so then I'm going to come out of here, and I'm going to turn this into a deer pose. Now this leg that's up on top is going to be the leg that I peel around to the back. Okay. And I'm going to do this deer pose as a forward bend. So, it's useful for me to put a couple blocks. So basically what I have with the deer is that my thigh bone in the front leg, it makes a 90, or goes straight out and then makes a 90-degree angle at the knee. Thigh bone on the back leg goes straight out to the side and makes a 90-degree angle at the knee. No one's getting out a protractor, just whatever is close enough for, for you. And then you can put your elbows on the floor in front, or find a couple of block. So I just want a little bit of a forward position. I'm going to go all the way to the ground. Again, I'm trying to keep my spine mostly level. I'm trying to keep my hips mostly stable. If I go too far towards the ground, then all I do is just pick my left hip up. I'm not trying to hold it to the ground. I'm just trying to let it be as heavy as possible. And this for me gives kind of like beginnings of a flavor of a pigeon, but also some interesting tension in this back leg internal rotation of the hip is a little different and interesting. I'm a fan. If you want to turn it into a pigeon pose, I'm not going to stop you. Not everybody likes this pose. So I'm going to do 2 more breaths. And then I'm going to come out of here and bring this leg all the way back. Start with a shimmy, and then I'm going to put it up on top. Now you could do the cow face where you put both knees on top, or you can do kind of this double pigeon, fire logs, whatever you want to call this pose, square pose in the yin world. And I use a block just so my ankle joint doesn't poke into my poor little inner thigh. Works better. But then I still have my thighs kind of making a little bit of a square. My thighs are inward toward each other, so I get a lot more of that sensation in the outer hip. The closer the thighs come towards each other, the more this becomes an outer hip phenomenon. Farther away we take the knees from hip distance, the more it becomes an inner thigh phenomenon, right? So are we using abductors or adductors in the stretch? Take a big breath. I'm going to float out of here, release this whole thing, and then just pause for a moment. Close my eyes and feel. So I've done a bunch of stuff on one hip, different things, so it might be different on each side, but a bunch of asymmetrical work, basically. So we got to do the other side. So we're going to start with the twist. So again, you can do whichever version of the twist is right for you. I'm going to keep this really simple and just do a cross-legged position. Sit up nice and tall and rotate. And again, as soon as I feel the rotation start to lift my left hip and bring it with me, I'm going to pause there. And so I can just let the spine do all the work. And there might be some more room in my upper back as time goes along. My lower back is probably done. I detect that there might be like a slight scoliosis somewhere in my kind of like middle to lower part of my back, where there's just a little bit more tension when I twist to the right than the left. Again, it's super mild, but just like tiniest difference in shape of bone or placement of bone. I have not had this verified by a medical professional, it's just the way that I'm feeling it. But my upper back is a little bit more forgiving, so I can kind of bring one shoulder back and one shoulder forward and not overdo the lower back and be okay. So you can play with yours as well. Like, where are the places in your back that feel like they're a little bit more inclined to twist? This is why I don't do the whole arm twisty thing, because it takes away from some of the sensitivity that I'm getting in my back. And that's really where I want to notice things. Again, you might have a different notion about that. Do you? I'm going to do 2 more breaths here, and then I'll switch it around to the deer. Unwind the spine. My spine's going to take a little bit longer to finish unwinding, but we'll get started here. So again, I just kind of set myself up with the basic parameters of the deer shape and the legs. And then sometimes I like to just sit up with this, but today I'm liking this forward bending idea. And it seems pleasant while I'm here. And then just adjust the foot, like you might want your foot a little further back, so you've got a deeper bend at the knee and the back leg, or at the front leg. So you get to decide. The main thing with yoga is that we want to, like the whole practice, if we go all the way back to the first kind of written documentation that really outlines yoga as a practice. It's not the only document, although sometimes you would think it was, if you're in this end of the world. But like the notion is that yoga is this process of becoming present in the moment and kind of stopping a lot of the scripts and the kind of hidden motivations and other kinds of stuff that go on inside of our brain, right? There's little chemical signals and other little things that are all trying to do different things. We've got the ego part of our mind that's trying to make itself right all the time or whatever. It's useful. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes we identify with it and then it's tricky. So yoga is really the process of trying to become really present in the moment for all of the shenanigans that are going on inside our body and brain and heart and wherever else, and notice them so that we're not being tugged unconsciously or subconsciously by all those ideas. So I'm going to bring my leg around, coming up, lean in, and just, I like to slowly transition from one pose to another. Like, why are we in a hurry, right? Take your time. Add support where places feel a little vulnerable. You could do any version of this kind of a shape that you want. Just kind of talking about this outer part of our hip. So if yoga is the process of being present in the moment, then really the poses can be any way you want, right? The poses have rules. There's certain rules that you want to follow in general just because like body, biomechanically there's things that are just better than other things. There are some yoga poses out there that are so extreme that I've known people who've broken bones by doing extreme yoga poses. One lady broke her hip doing an extreme yoga pose. Like there's people who've been had carotid artery like ruptures because they were doing a yoga pose. I personally know someone who broke a foot bone, got a stress fracture in the foot from doing an extreme yoga pose, which is the least problematic of all of them, but still a drag. And so, I'm not sure that's necessary. Sometimes the poses that are wild are fun. They look really good on Instagram. But really, the real work is trying to get present and practicing that over and over and over and over again, trying to make a habit of it. Spending more time actually living our life right in the moment and less time with all of the other nonsense. I'm still a novice at it, personally. But I hope to get better. We're going to do this for about 3 more breaths. So when you're ready, you've done your 3 breaths, you can come out of there. So we're just about ready to end this whole situation. So you have to ask yourself, like, what's going to be like that pose for me that's going to be the best way to end this? And for me, it's feeling like a wide angle forward bend, but that's not everybody's favorite, and there's a lot of reasons for that, genetically and otherwise. So if there's another pose that you are like, oh, I would like to do like some happy baby, or I would really love to do legs up the wall instead of Shavasana, so I'm going to spend this couple of minutes here getting myself into that position, or maybe you've got something else that is your thing. This is your chance to do the thing that's just right for you. For me, fall seems like the season for forward bending. It's like climbing into a little cave. Our way into our final relaxation shape. I'm going to do a corpse pose. I'm going to put this blanket underneath my legs And then I'm just going to stretch up. Now you can do all kinds of different things, but you want to make it comfortable. So if laying on your stomach is more comfortable, do that. If putting a bunch of pillows around you is more comfortable, do that. Oh. You get to decide what's comfy. For me, just having something under the thigh is the thing that helps my hip flexors relax. So there's no tug on my low back at all. So then, because that muscle that tugs on the low back is a fight or flight muscle, if I let it tug, it's really hard to relax. So the more I can soften that and let that muscle descend back into my body, the more my nervous system gets this message of like, oh, it's all good, man, it's all good. Peace, man. And it lets me relax. And then the other places for me that are really critical are the forehead and the eyes, like letting the orb of the eye itself kind of sink back a little, but then also softening this whole area, like the little crow feet area, right around the temples, and that little area right there in between the eyebrows, that has to get soft. Let the teeth separate just a little bit so the mouth is really soft and the lips are really soft. And then just imagine that you're making your eyes kinder. So when you gaze at someone you love, or you're feeling compassion towards someone, the eyes take on a particular quality. Really, almost like the eyes of a cow or a deer. Very sweet, deep pools of welcoming love. And try to get your eyes to do that for you, right? So you're having compassion for yourself. Pose is all about the nervous system, and really, especially in times of stress, the nervous system needs time to completely shift. And I think it's nice right before bed especially to really just kind of dial in that deep, relaxing, stress-free nervous system. take a nice big breath. Let go with a big deep ah. And you can start to wiggle and stretch and move around. Oh, goodness. Now, when you're ready, you can bring yourself to a seated position and then say goodbye to each other with a big old breath. Nice big inhale. Big deep sigh. Namaste. Have a great rest of your night.